I've just stumbled upon this text about Gnosticism, which I've read up to sort of like here so far, and it seems to be quite a good read. So I thought I'd read part of these bits out, and I'll link the source in the description if for anyone that wants to read the rest of it. But I mean, I do this to make certain people aware of the doctrine that they are following, and actually I will show you. So to quickly reiterate what I said to the mystery fool yesterday, he was describing the Gnostics, particularly Mac, as a wolf in sheep's clothing, like Jesus saying, "Many will come in my name." Notice he viciously turned on us the minute we leaned towards Jesus. Who does that? It isn't normal. And I said, it is the doctrine of the Gnostics. They claim the middle, therefore they claim to be God's judges. They judge everything, themselves, others, and the law. They spit on the Bible, and they spit on Jesus, because they do and say contrary to him. In the next breath, they spread Gnostic doctrine using the name of Jesus. But they cannot see their contradiction, since they have made themselves wise beyond reproach, that nobody should challenge them. Any who challenge them will be met by their lack of belief system. It is a sinister game, as who can fight a thing which denies itself? Who can count a thing that diminishes at the start of every counting? They will claim a doctrine, but they will not give it a name. They are the ones who claim knowledge away from God. Now, it becomes important when you realise that men are obligated to serve for as long as they have life. So it's important that whoever you are serving is master over you. And so if you say that I have no master, then already you are engaging in a spirit of whoredom, since you will do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you will mix many different types, and you will say that these are your works, and it will be nothing but a mess, and your lack of mastery will be shown. So when you claim a doctrine but do not give it a name, you are engaging in what would be called a cowardice, since you claim something which nobody can speak of, and yet you use it as a way to judge others. Therefore you claim knowledge away from God, but you are given a delusion. And this bridges us into Gnosticism, as that is exactly what Gnosticism is. So, to begin, Gnosticism, except perhaps in 1 Timothy 6:20, O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoid profane and vain babblings, and oppositions of science falsely so called. Where Paul warns Timothy against the gnosis which is falsely so called, is not directly alluded to in the New Testament. Nevertheless, it's leaven. For anyone who doesn't know, this leaven or leaven is what's added to dough to make it rise. So, I've seen it before, and I've started to call the Gnostics the Leaveners, since they are self-raising. They raise themselves up. Nevertheless, its leaven was actually working, as will immediately be seen, and constituted a most serious peril in the apostolic church. That strange, obscure movement, partly intellectual, partly fanatical, in the 2nd century, spread with the swiftness of an epidemic over the church from Syria to Gaul. It is therefore of high importance to gain a right conception of the nature of this potent anti-Christian influence. That is not easy, I know. The difficulty in dealing with Gnosticism is that it was not a homogeneous system of either religion or philosophy. It was a mixing, but embraced many widely diversified sects holding opinions drawn from a great variety of sources. The infinitely varied shapes assumed by the systems render it almost impossible to classify them, or even to give an account of their leading ideas, which shall not be open to objection. We might as well try to classify the products of a tropical jungle, or the shapes and hues of the sunset clouds, which change under our view as we look at them. Now this was amazing, as it almost precisely matches what I've said here. Who can fight a thing which denies itself? Who can count a thing which diminishes at the start of every counting? The infinitely varied shapes assumed by the systems render it almost impossible to classify them. They have this doctrine which they give no name to, and they claim it by experience, but their experiences are only lies. On the general definition of Gnosticism, a few authorities may be cited. Gnosticism, says Dr. Gwatkin, may be provisionally described as a number of schools of philosophy, oriental in general character, but taking in the idea of a redemption through Christ. This they stole, and they stole it only because of the success and popularity of it, that they had to incorporate it into their own doctrine, and further modified in different sects by a third element, which may be Judaism, Hellenism, or Christianity. The Gnostics took over only the idea of a redemption through Christ, not the full Christian doctrine, for they made it rather a redemption of the philosophers from matter than a redemption of mankind from sin. Dr. Orr writes, Gnosticism may be described generally as the fantastic product of the blending of certain Christian ideas, particularly that of redemption through Christ, with speculation and imaginings derived from a medley of sources: Greek, Jewish, Parsic, philosophies, religions, theosophies, mysteries. In a period when the human mind was in a kind of ferment, and when opinions of every sort were jumbled together in an unimaginable welter, it involves, as the name denotes, a claim to knowledge of a kind of which the ordinary believer was incapable, and in the possession of which salvation, in the full sense, consisted. This knowledge of which the Gnostic boasted, related to the subjects ordinarily treated of in religious philosophy. Gnosticism was a species of religious philosophy. Neander has described Gnosticism as the first notable attempt to introduce into Christianity the existing elements of mental culture, and to render it more complete on the hitherto rather neglected side of theoretical knowledge. It was an attempt of the mind of the ancient world in its yearning after knowledge, and in its dissatisfaction with the present, to bring within its grasp and to appropriate the treasures of this kind which Christianity presented. It was popular, so it was stolen. Gnosticism accordingly comprehends in itself many previously existing tendencies. It is an amalgam into which quite a number of different elements have been fused. A heretical system of thought, at once subtle, speculative, and elaborate. It endeavoured to introduce into Christianity a so-called higher knowledge, which was grounded partly on the philosophic creed in which Greeks and Romans had taken refuge, consequent on the gradual decay and breaking up of their own religions. They lost their own religion and began to steal it from others. Partly, as will be shown, on the philosophies of Plato and of Philo, and still more on the philosophies and theosophies and religions of the East, especially those of Persia and of India. For a long time the pagan beliefs had ceased to be taken seriously by thoughtful men, and had been displaced by various creeds derived from philosophical speculation. These in themselves were abstract and unsatisfying, but had been partly vitalized by union with theosophies of the East. An attempt was made on the part of this philosophical religion to effect an alliance with Christianity. A section of the church was dissatisfied with the simplicity of the gospel, and sought to advance to something higher by adopting the current speculations. The late books of the New Testament are all occupied, more or less, with this movement, which was the more dangerous as it threatened the church from within. Gnosticism, though usually regarded as a heresy, was not really such. It was not the perverting of Christian truth. It came, rather, from outside. Having worked its way into the Christian church, it was then heretical. Although it became a corrupting influence within the church, it was an alien by birth. While the church yet sojourned within the pale of Judaism, it enjoyed immunity from this plague, but as soon as it broke through these narrow bounds, it found itself in a world where the decaying religions and philosophies of the West were in acute fermentation, under the influence of a new and powerful leaven from the East, while the infusion of Christianity itself into this fermenting mass only added to the bewildering multiplicity of Gnostic sects and systems it brought forth. And this is the key part, since the Gnostics have all invented a lie, where they say, we cannot trust the Bible since it was created by men, and men only tell lies. And yet they have invented their own set of Bibles, called the Apocryphon, or the Apocryphal texts, which were taken only 70, 80 years ago, and yet they claim it is truth. But we find that these texts, which they say are the oldest, and therefore more to be trusted, but do they know the source of them? Since they were from the Nag Hammadi, you will find it in Egypt, and therefore Alexandria. Mansell, in his work on the Gnostic heresies, sums up the principal sources of Gnosticism in these three: Platonism, the Persian religion, and the Buddhism of India. To Platonism it owed much of its philosophical form and tendencies, and this became many fraternities, namely Freemasonry. From the dualism of the Persian religion it derived its speculations regarding the origin of evil, and much of what it taught about emanations, Sophia, and the emanation of the archons. To Buddhism he thinks it owed the doctrine of the antagonism between matter and spirit, and the unreality of derived existence, the germ of Gnosticism. Mansell also holds that there is the possibility that Gnosticism derived certain of its features from the Kabbalah, or secret teaching of the Jews in the two books, the Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Creation, and the Zohar, or Book of Light. An influence of Buddhism on Gnosticism, however, may safely be doubted, as there is no reason to believe that the knowledge of Buddhist doctrine had so early penetrated into the West. The Jewish works named by Mansell are really products of the Middle Ages. The other sources named were really influential. We notice two: the Alexandrian philosophy and the Parsic dualism. Now I'm not going to read further, since that's your prerogative, but you should see that these people who claim Jesus yet disown the doctrine and the Bible on the basis of lies, yet insert and parade their own lies around, are easily defeatable, since they don't even possess knowledge of their own doctrine, nor the one that they oppose. If you read this, you will discover that these ones who claim experience of the world, yet hold to no doctrine and claim no masters except their self, are the ones who raise themselves up and become judges and fall in love with the world and the judgment of it. And they have no faith of which saves, but they make many works, as in they make many works in their efforts to salvation, but they only find delusion, and they raise themselves above those with faith. Though we will see in the end who it was that commanded greater respect.